In 1951, amidst the icy grip of Moscow's winter, a seemingly ordinary task for Arthur, a piano tuner, turns into a chilling discovery. Everything you know about the Cold War espionage is about to change as he uncovers a ghostly frequency that defies explanation. Why does a note sustain longer than it should in the grand reception hall of the Spaso House? This anomaly hints at a hidden secret, something far more sinister than just an acoustic oddity. What lies behind the Great Seal hanging on the wall? And the answer changes everything. February 9th, 1951. The city is Moscow in winter. The kind of winter that feels like punishment, like the earth itself is under siege. The wind moves through the streets like a blade, seeking every gap in clothing, every exposed inch of skin. The buildings are gray, the sky is grayer, and over everything there hangs a smell that visitors never quite name. Coal smoke mixed with bread and something metallic, something that tastes like iron on the tongue. In the heart of this frozen city, on Spaso-Peskovskaya Square, stands a building that does not belong. Spaso House, the official residence of the United States ambassador to the Soviet Union. It is a neoclassical mansion, 3 stories of pale cream-colored brick, with tall windows that look out over the square like the eyes of a watchful diplomat. Inside, chandeliers hang from the ceilings, genuine Tsar-era chandeliers, fixtures from before the revolution when this building served the nobility. The marble floors echo with every footstep. They have echoed with the footsteps of history. In 1933, when the building was first occupied by American staff, it rang with the steps of the earliest American diplomatic presence in Stalin's Soviet Union. By 1940, it had become a fortress. The Nazis were advancing on Moscow, and within these walls, Averell Harriman, the American ambassador, coordinated the first American aid to a desperate Soviet Union. The German bombers never reached Spaso House, though the war came close enough that the staff could hear the artillery. Now, in 1951, the war is long over, but in many ways, the siege continues. Stalin is still alive. His secret police still rule through fear. The Soviet Union has just detonated its first atomic bomb. Korea is burning, and the Cold War has reached a pitch of paranoia that permeates every street in Moscow, every conversation, every glance between strangers. Foreign diplomats live in a bubble, a terrible, visible bubble, in the center of an enemy capital. The Americans know they are watched. They know that every Soviet employee at the embassy, the drivers, the cooks, the cleaners, are almost certainly reporting to the MGB, the Soviet secret police, the organization that would later become the KGB. Inside Spaso House, there are rules. Classified discussions are only held in a special room on the upper floor, a chamber specially built and specially shielded, a room within the room where conversations cannot leak through walls or windows or the very air itself. Everywhere else, in the study, in the reception hall, in the dining room, the staff speaks carefully, as if every wall has ears. But on this February morning, there is something else moving through the walls of Spaso House. Something that does not have ears, but is, in every meaningful sense, listening. And no one knows it's there. Not yet. The man who will discover it is named Arthur Crane. He is 48 years old. He has traveled to Moscow 3 times before, and each time he has returned to London swearing he would never do it again. But here he is, stepping out of a Soviet automobile outside the gates of the embassy, clutching a worn leather tool case, wearing a wool suit that is not quite thick enough for Moscow winter. Arthur is a piano tuner. In the year 1951, in a world that still values beauty and culture alongside weapons and suspicion, a certified Steinway technician is one of the rarest and most needed specialists on Earth. There are perhaps 10 qualified Steinway tuners in all of Europe. 3 of them, only 3, are willing to travel to Moscow. Arthur is one of them. He has been making this journey twice a year since 1948, maintaining an instrument that sits in the reception hall of Spaso House like a piece of pre-war elegance, a Steinway Model D concert grand piano. The piano was shipped to Moscow in 1938, a gift from the American Cultural Mission to Soviet authorities, a gesture meant to convey that America valued the arts, that America had a soul beyond commerce and politics. The piano has become the centerpiece of every important reception at Spaso House. Soviet dignitaries have stood beside it. American diplomats have spoken to the press with their hands resting on its polished wood. It is not just an instrument. It is a symbol. And Arthur, over the past 3 years, has become the man who keeps it alive. Look at Arthur closely. He is lean, almost gaunt, with prematurely gray hair that has been gray since his 40s. His hands are remarkable, careful, precise, the hands of someone who has spent 40 years learning to listen through his fingertips. His left ear carries a hearing aid, a flesh-colored device that he hates, a clunky piece of 1940s technology that sits behind his ear like a monument to his own incompleteness. He never wears it in public if he can help it. He wears it in Moscow because Moscow demands it. The hearing loss there is too severe to compensate for otherwise. Arthur was born in Croydon, South London, in 1903. His father tuned pianos for Steinway's London showroom. His mother taught piano. Arthur was raised in a household where music was not an art form, but an operating system, the ambient medium through which the world was processed and understood. Before he learned to read, he could identify notes by ear. Before he was 12, he could tune a piano to concert standard. By 20, he was one of the youngest Steinway certified technicians in England, and pianists, the great ones, the recording artists, the concert hall legends, began requesting him specifically. The Blitz nearly ended everything. October 15, 1940. A German bomb fell near his workshop in Croydon. The blast was close enough to rupture his left eardrum, close enough to damage the tiny ossicular chain, those 3 infinitesimal bones that transmit vibrations from the eardrum to the inner ear. In a single moment, in the fraction of a second that the bomb was falling, Arthur lost 60% of his hearing in his left ear. He was 37 years old. Doctors told him his career was finished. A piano tuner who cannot hear with both ears is like a surgeon who cannot see with both eyes. The mathematics of tuning require stereo hearing. The spatial relationships between notes require balance across 2 ears. But Arthur adapted. The human brain is a stubborn instrument, reluctant to accept limitation. Over the years following the Blitz, as Arthur struggled to continue his work, his right ear began to change. It developed a heightened sensitivity, an almost supernatural ability to detect certain frequencies, particularly the mid-range frequencies between 300 and 500 Hertz, the frequencies where pianos live. His brain, compensating for the loss of his left ear, had boosted the gain on the right. He had developed what an audiologist might later describe as compensatory hyperacusis, a heightened and sharpened auditory sensitivity in the remaining ear. His wife, Elizabeth, called him the man who hears ghosts. He could detect resonances and sympathetic vibrations that other tuners required electronic equipment to find. He could hold a tuning fork and hear, through walls and wood and plaster, what objects in a room were vibrating in sympathy. It was, in its way, a gift. A terrible, beautiful gift. A wound that had become a weapon. Arthur arrives at Spaso House on the morning of February 9th. A Soviet driver picks him up from the Metropole Hotel, where American visitors stay, where the rooms are bugged in ways both obvious and subtle. The car passes through checkpoints. At the embassy gates, a Marine guard checks his passport. Arthur is led through the marble hallways, past the chandeliers, to the grand reception hall where the piano sits waiting, draped in a cloth dust cover like a sleeping giant. He removes the cover carefully. The Steinway reveals itself, black lacquer, the lid open, strings like 1,000 taut nerves. Arthur examines the action, the hammers, the dampers, the mechanical linkages that translate finger motion into the striking of strings. Everything looks normal. The piano has drifted from temperature fluctuations. Moscow's winter has loosened it. Routine work. The work he has done 1,000 times. He begins tuning methodically, working from bass to treble, checking each note against his tuning fork, against his right ear. The reception hall is cold. His breath moves in front of him like small clouds. His fingers are stiff. He works anyway. The A, the B, the C, the D, the E, the F. The F above middle C rings at 349.23 Hertz. It rings cleanly. It decays normally. And then, faintly, so faintly that for a moment Arthur wonders if he has imagined it, the note continues. Not as a piano tone, but as a thin, ghostly resonance, a frequency that sustains for 2 seconds, then 3 seconds, lingering in the air like something that cannot quite bring itself to die. Arthur stops. His hand hovers over the keyboard. He sets down his tuning fork and listens to the silence. He strikes the F again. There it is. The note rings. The ghost remains. It should not be there. Every tuner knows the acoustic properties of a concert hall, of a reception room, of a Moscow mansion built in the 19th century. Wood resonates. Windows vibrate. Heating ducts sing. But there are patterns to these resonances, natural frequencies that follow the laws of physics and the geometry of the room. A note that sustains at precisely the frequency of the piano's F, that begins exactly when the piano string is struck, that decays at an unnatural rate. This is not a random acoustic phenomenon. This is something designed. This is something tuned. Arthur rises from the piano bench. He picks up a tuning fork from his kit, the A at 440 Hertz, the standard note. He strikes it and holds it out into the room like a divining rod. He walks slowly, listening with his right ear, the hypersensitive one, the ear that hears ghosts. No sympathetic response. He tries another fork, the middle C, 321 Hertz. Nothing. He tries the D at 293 Hertz. Nothing. He returns to the F, strikes it. The ghost returns. There is something in this room, something hollow, something with a natural frequency of precisely 349 Hertz, something tuned like a musical instrument, something that only answers to the F. Arthur walks the room, holding the vibrating fork ahead of him. The resonance grows stronger as he moves toward the ambassador's study, a room adjacent to the reception hall, separated by an open passage. The ambassador's private office, the room where classified discussions sometimes happen, where strategy is discussed, where history is sometimes whispered. And on the wall above the fireplace, there hangs a wooden plaque. It is carved in the shape of the Great Seal of the United States, the eagle with spread wings, with arrows in one talon and an olive branch in the other. The plaque is beautiful. The carving is intricate, each feather detailed, each curve of the eagle's head rendered with care. It was presented to Ambassador Avril Harriman in August of 1945 by a group of Soviet schoolchildren from the Young Pioneer Organization during a ceremony at the National Children's Camp at Artek on the coast of the Black Sea. Arthur holds the tuning fork near the seal. The ghost frequency sings. But before we dive into this story, make sure to leave a like and subscribe to the channel so we can bring you the most gripping Cold War and espionage stories every day. And tell me in the comments where you're watching from. It really helps support us. Arthur reports the anomaly to James Buckley, the embassy's administrative officer. Buckley is a career diplomat, one of those men who has spent 20 years navigating the bureaucratic pathways between State Department instructions and reality on the ground. He listens politely as Arthur describes the ghost, the sustained frequency, the resonance that should not exist, the fact that it emanates specifically from the wooden Great Seal hanging in the ambassador's study. "Mr. Buckley," Arthur says, "something inside or behind that seal is resonating at 349 hertz. It should not be doing that. Wood does not resonate at precise frequencies like that, not unless there's a cavity or a metallic element inside it. And I've been tuning pianos for 40 years. I know what I'm hearing." Buckley is polite but dismissive. The seal has been hanging there since 1945. It was examined upon receipt, X-rayed as a matter of procedure, because diplomatic gifts from the Soviets must always be examined, must always be checked for anything suspicious. No electronics were found, no wiring, no metallic components beyond the small nails that hold the carving to the wall. It is a piece of wood. A very nice piece of wood. A gift from Soviet children to the American people. A gesture of friendship between warring allies. "I appreciate your concern," Buckley says. "I really do. But Ambassadors Harriman, Smith, and now Kirk have all worked in that study with the seal on the wall. If there was something wrong with it, we'd have found it by now. It's been X-rayed. It's clean." Arthur persists, but carefully. "With respect, sir, I do not care what an X-ray showed 6 years ago. Something in that wall is vibrating at 349 hertz, and wood does not do that. Not at that frequency, not with that clarity. There is a resonant cavity behind that seal, and it has no natural explanation." Buckley tells Arthur he appreciates the observation. He'll log it in the administrative record. Arthur should focus on the piano. Arthur finishes his tuning work that afternoon. He packs his tools, closes his case, and is driven back to the Metropole Hotel. He sits in his room that evening, listening to the sounds of Moscow through his window, the traffic, the distant sirens, the wind moving through the square. He thinks about the ghost. He thinks about the seal. And he feels uneasy in a way that he cannot quite articulate, in a way that Elizabeth, if she were here, would probably recognize immediately. That evening, Arthur writes a letter. He addresses it carefully, obliquely, to a friend who works at the British Embassy. He does not mention the Great Seal or the ghost frequency. He asks, casually, whether anyone at the British Embassy has noticed anything unusual about the acoustic properties of the reception areas in Spaso House. He asks whether there have been any unusual resonances, any sympathetic vibrations, anything that seemed out of place or unexplained. The letter is mailed. It reaches London in the diplomatic pouch. His friend reads it with curiosity and passes it upward to the MI6 liaison attached to the British Embassy. Flashback now to August 1945. The war in Europe is over. Germany has surrendered. The Soviet Union and the United States are still allies, barely, tenuously, the partnership fraying even as they sign the agreements. On the coast of the Black Sea, at Artek, there is a summer camp for Soviet children. A delegation from the American embassy arrives for a ceremony of cultural exchange. Imagine it, the sunlight on the water, the warmth of a southern Soviet summer, the red square calm. Soviet children in red pioneer scarves gather on a stage. They sing a song about friendship between nations. And then they present a gift, a wooden plaque carved in the shape of the Great Seal of the United States. Ambassador Harriman, who was there for the ceremony, is genuinely moved. He accepts the gift. He says a few words about the friendship between the American and Soviet peoples. The children applaud. Photographs are taken. The moment is preserved. But underneath the moment, beneath the surface of the ceremony, there is another history happening, a darker history. In Moscow, in the secret laboratories of the KGB, the Soviet secret police, there are men in white coats working on a problem. How do you listen to conversations in a room without putting a man inside the room? How do you hear words spoken by American diplomats without risking exposure, without requiring continuous human presence, without leaving traces? The answer comes from an unlikely source. There is a man named Leon Theremin. Theremin is, in the most literal sense, a Soviet prisoner. He is a brilliant physicist and an inventor. A man who came to America in the 1920s as a musical innovator and created the theremin, an electronic instrument that produces haunting, wavering tones by sensing the position of a musician's hands in the air around it. The theremin is beautiful and strange and utterly unique. No other instrument like it has ever existed. But theremin made a mistake. In 1938, when Stalin's purges were at their height, when anyone with connections to the West was automatically suspected of being a spy, Theremin decided to return to the Soviet Union voluntarily. He thought he would be safe. He thought his fame as an inventor would protect him. Instead, he was arrested. He was imprisoned in a sharashka, a secret Soviet prison laboratory where prisoners with technical skills were forced to work on weapons development and intelligence projects. He was told he would either work or die. He worked. And in that prison laboratory, under guard, with his life depending on his usefulness, Leon Theremin designed a device that would become one of the most sophisticated pieces of espionage technology that had ever been built. A device that would listen without being seen, that would hear without ears, that would bridge the gap between music and war. He called it the Thing. Technically, it was a passive cavity resonator. Let me explain how it worked, because the elegance of it is central to this entire story. The device was a small metal cylinder, about 3/4 of an inch in diameter, no larger than an A battery. Inside the cylinder was a thin metal diaphragm, a membrane that could vibrate in response to sound waves. Attached to one end of the cylinder was a small antenna rod. And that was it. No battery, no wires, no circuit board, no power source whatsoever. It was completely passive, electronically dead. Which is why X-rays showed nothing. What would they show? It looked like a piece of plumbing hardware, a tube, a hollow metal thing. X-ray machines do not reveal whether an object is bugged. They reveal whether there are high-density materials or electronic components. The thing had neither. But here is where the genius emerged. The device worked through a principle called resonant cavity activation. The Soviets would park a surveillance van on the street outside the embassy. Inside the van, there would be transmitters and receivers. The van would beam a radio signal, a strong signal, at a specific frequency, toward the building where the thing was hidden. The signal would pass through the wall, the wood, all the materials between the street and the ambassador's study. The signal would reach the antenna of the device. Now, here is where the physics becomes beautiful. The radio signal, at its specific frequency, would activate the hollow cylinder. The cylinder would resonate. It would vibrate in sympathy with that incoming signal, just as the F in the Steinway piano had vibrated in sympathy with Arthur's tuning fork. The vibrating cylinder would transform the radio signal into sound wave sensitivity. And as the diaphragm vibrated in response to sound waves in the room, voices, conversations, people moving, telephone calls, those vibrations would modulate the incoming radio signal. The radio beam would bounce back toward the van, but now it was carrying information. It had been encoded with the audio of the room. The van would receive the modified signal. The signal would be demodulated, decoded, and what came out the speaker would be the sound of the voices and conversations inside the room. It was, in essence, a microphone that only existed when someone turned it on from outside. When the van was not transmitting, the device was inert. It was a hollow piece of metal inside a piece of wood, invisible, undetectable, silent, a perfect spy. And it was all thanks to Leon Theremin, the musician prisoner in a Soviet sharashka, being forced to weaponize his own genius. The Great Seal with the thing inside was presented to Ambassador Harriman. He loved it. He hung it in his study. For 6 years, it listened. Arthur returns to London. He tries to forget Moscow. He tries to forget the ghost frequency, but he cannot. He lies awake next to Elizabeth thinking about it. He works in his shop in Croydon, tuning pianos for concert halls and recording studios, and his mind keeps returning to that thin, ghostly resonance. In late 1951, about 6 months after Arthur heard the ghost, he is contacted by a British intelligence officer. The officer asks Arthur if he would be willing to describe in detail the resonance he heard in Spaso House. Arthur agrees. He describes the frequency, 349 hertz. He describes the location, the wooden seal above the fireplace. He describes how it only responded to that specific note, how it sustained too long, how it suggested a hollow cavity, a resonant chamber, something designed. The British Intelligence Service passes this information to American counterparts. The Americans take it seriously because by this point it is 1952, and American intelligence agencies have begun to worry that perhaps something is wrong with Spaso House. Perhaps something is listening. In late 1952, the State Department dispatches a technical security officer named John Ford to Moscow. Ford is the best they have, a man trained in electronic surveillance detection, carrying equipment that did not exist when the seal was first examined in 1945. Equipment that can detect radio signals, that can measure electromagnetic fields, that can find what crude X-ray machines missed. Ford sweeps the ambassador's study. His equipment confirms what Arthur heard. There is a radio signal emanating from the area around the Great Seal. There is something there. Something that should not be there. They remove the seal from the wall carefully, very carefully. Ford examines it. He finds a cavity carved into the back. Inside the cavity, nestled in the wood, is the thing. It is exactly what Ford expected, and nothing like he expected. It is small. It is dull. It looks like a piece of plumbing hardware. There are no wires. There is no battery. There is no blinking light or threatening apparatus. It is just a cylinder, a membrane, and a small antenna rod. Nothing more. But John Ford knows what he is looking at. He knows what this device can do. He knows how long it has been listening. He knows that every word spoken in that room since August 1945, every diplomatic strategy, every policy decision, every classified conversation may have been captured by the Soviet secret police. The shock wave this sends through American intelligence is enormous. The damage assessment begins immediately. For 6 years, the ambassador and his staff have been speaking openly in that room. They've discussed Marshall Plan strategy. They've discussed NATO formation. They've discussed the Korean War and American nuclear policy. They've read classified cables aloud. They've had sensitive telephone conversations within earshot of the room. All of it may have been heard. All of it may have been known to the Soviets. The discovery triggers a comprehensive sweep of every American embassy around the world. Other listening devices are found, not in Soviet embassies, but in locations where Soviet intelligence might have access. Dozens of devices are discovered, in walls, in furniture, in decorative objects. But none are as elegant or as technically advanced as the thing. It becomes a legend within the intelligence community, the most sophisticated piece of spy technology ever recovered. The Americans face an impossible dilemma. They have found the device, but revealing the discovery would alert the Soviets and compromise the investigation. They also cannot prove that the Soviets planted it. Technically, it was a gift from school children. The political implications are complex, and most troubling, they have no defense against this type of device. If the Soviets can build one, they can build 100. Every embassy in the world is potentially compromised. The discovery remains secret. The seal is removed from the wall, but the paranoia remains. The Americans begin to construct new kinds of spaces. The first, truly secure rooms, what would later be called Sensitive Compartmented Information Facilities, or SCIFs. Rooms within rooms, electromagnetically shielded, acoustically isolated. Double walls with insulation, filtered air, no windows, no passages. Complete isolation from the outside world. The thing forces a complete reimagining of what security means. Fade forward now. 8 years pass. We are in New York City. It is May 26, 1960. The United Nations General Assembly building on the East River. The Cold War has reached a new precipice. 2 weeks earlier,
The Soviet military shot down an American U-2 reconnaissance aircraft that was flying over Soviet territory. The pilot, a man named Francis Gary Powers, has been captured. Nikita Khrushchev, the Soviet premier, is furious.
He has come to the United Nations to condemn American imperialism, American espionage, American violations of Soviet sovereignty. Khrushchev has been giving speeches for days, denouncing America, demanding apologies, using the U-2 incident as proof that the Americans are the real aggressors, the real spies, the real violators of international law. But the American ambassador to the United Nations, a man named Henry Cabot Lodge, Jr., has been waiting for his moment. On May 26th, Lodge rises to speak. The General Assembly is crowded. Press photographers are positioned. Cameras are rolling. The world is watching. Lodge begins to speak, and then, with deliberate ceremony, he reaches behind his desk. He produces a wooden object. He holds it up before the General Assembly and the world's press. It is the Great Seal. The room goes silent. Lodge describes what the device is. He explains the principle of cavity resonance. He explains how the Soviets placed a listening device in a gift that was ostensibly from children. He explains how the device listened to the American ambassador for years. And he turns to the Soviet delegation and says, in substance, "You lecture us about espionage while you've been listening to our ambassador's office with a device hidden in a children's gift." The cameras flash. The photographers capture the moment. The device is displayed on the television news. It appears in newspapers around the world. The image of that dull, harmless-looking metal cylinder becomes one of the most iconic images of the Cold War, proof of Soviet deception, proof of Soviet espionage, proof that nothing about Soviet words could be trusted. Khrushchev's moral advantage from the U-2 incident evaporates in that instant. Yes, America was spying, but America was honest about its military capabilities. The Soviets were lying about their intentions, hiding listening devices in children's gifts, violating the sanctity of diplomatic immunity with passive microphones. The Great Seal and the thing inside it becomes a symbol of Cold War paranoia made manifest and tangible. Arthur Crane is working in his workshop in Croydon when he sees the news on the BBC evening broadcast. He is alone. Elizabeth is upstairs, preparing dinner. He watches as American Ambassador Lodge holds the seal up before the General Assembly. He watches as the camera zooms in on the thing, that small, dull cylinder, rendered suddenly historic and sinister by context. He sees it and something shifts in him. The ghost he heard, the impossible resonance, the thing that no one believed until X-rays and electronic detection equipment confirmed its existence. It is now on television, being shown to millions of people, being displayed as evidence of Soviet treachery. He feels vindicated. He feels saddened. He feels awe at the device's elegance, at the engineering genius that created it. He feels anger at the years it spent listening. He calls upstairs to Elizabeth. She comes down from the kitchen. "Do you remember when I told you about the ghost in Moscow?" he asks. "The resonance I heard in the embassy. They found it. It was real." Elizabeth, who has spent 48 years listening to Arthur hear things that no one else could hear, who has learned to trust his ears even when the world doubted them, is quiet for a moment. "Of course it was real, Arthur," she says. "It was always real." Arthur continues working for another 20 years.
He becomes something of a legend in the small, rarefied world of piano technology, the man who heard a Soviet spy device with his bare ear.
But the story remains classified until long after his death, and during his lifetime he tells it only to Elizabeth and a few trusted colleagues in the music world. He tunes pianos for concert halls. He works with recording studios. He services the instruments of world-famous pianists. He trains younger technicians. And he becomes the living embodiment of a principle that the intelligence world was only beginning to understand: that sometimes the most sophisticated detection equipment is a human being, particularly a human being who has been wounded and has adapted, who has compensated for loss by developing heightened sensitivity, who has learned to listen more carefully than anyone else. Imagine Arthur in his later years. His hearing in his left ear continues to deteriorate, but his right ear remains extraordinary. His hands are still steady at 70. At 80, he sits at pianos and he tunes them with the precision of a man who treats each note like a confession. Occasionally, in a quiet room, after striking a tuning fork, he pauses and listens for longer than he needs to. He checks for ghosts, for resonances that should not be there, for cavities and chambers and devices hidden in walls. It becomes a habit, almost a ritual. A tuning fork struck, a moment of listening, a check for the invisible. And now reflect for a moment on what the thing represents. Leon Theremin, a musician and inventor, a man whose genius was celebrated and then imprisoned, a man forced by totalitarian power to weaponize his own brilliance. Theremin created a device that bridged the worlds of music and espionage. He invented the theremin by sensing invisible electromagnetic fields and converting them into music. He invented the thing by converting radio waves and vibrations into stolen secrets. Both devices turn invisible signals into information. One creates beauty. The other steals secrets. Both were born from the same mind, shaped by opposite pressures. One from artistic inspiration, the other from fear and imprisonment. There is a terrible irony in this. The most advanced piece of Soviet spy technology was created not by a dedicated communist operative, but by a prisoner working under duress. Theremin created the thing not because he believed in Soviet communism, but because the alternative was death. His genius, under torture and imprisonment, became a tool of oppression. And there is another irony, equally profound. A device engineered to be undetectable by machines, by X-rays, by conventional detection methods, by all the electronic apparatus that intelligence agencies possessed in 1945, was detected by a man whose disability gave him compensatory supersensitivity. The Blitz had damaged Arthur's hearing. The damage had forced his right ear to compensate, to heighten, to develop sensitivity beyond what nature intended. The very wound that nearly ended his career as a piano tuner was what allowed him to hear what machines could not see. The thing was invisible. Arthur's right ear could hear it anyway. This is the paradox at the heart of the Cold War. It was an era where the boundaries between music and warfare, between art and espionage, between gifts and weapons, dissolved completely. A children's gift was a listening device. A piano tuner was a counterintelligence asset. A musical inventor was forced to become a spy technologist. A damaged ear was a more sensitive detector than a machine. Nothing was what it seemed. And the most dangerous things, the things that changed history,
were the ones you could not see with your eyes. They were things you had to listen for, things you had to hear. It is evening now in Arthur's workshop. Arthur is very old. His tools hang on the wall where they have hung for 60 years. His cases are worn leather. His tuning forks are dull silver. A piano sits in the corner, a small upright, not a concert grand, the kind of instrument that ordinary people play in living rooms. Arthur strikes a tuning fork. The A at 440 hertz rings out, pure and clean and crystalline. The fundamental frequency that every piano in the world is tuned to, the standard, the baseline, the truth. He holds the fork up and listens. The note decays. It fades. It is gone. Nothing resonates. No ghosts answer. Just the sound of a tuning fork and the silence that follows. But Arthur keeps listening because he knows better than almost anyone alive that silence is never really empty, that the air is full of signals, full of information, full of invisible conversations between machines and walls and wires and electromagnetic fields. That the world vibrates at frequencies most people will never hear. That somewhere, in some embassy or office or home or secure room, there is a device waiting to be activated, a resonance waiting to be heard, a ghost waiting for someone with the right ear to find it. The Cold War is over now. The Soviet Union has collapsed. Theremin has long been dead. He died in Moscow in 1993, a prisoner until the end, a scientist who was enslaved by the state and never truly freed. His theremin, the instrument he invented, is now a treasured piece of musical history, and musicians play it in concert halls around the world. The thing, his other invention, is displayed in museums, a relic of espionage, a warning about the depths of Cold War paranoia. But the principle remains, the principle of passive listening, the principle of invisible signals. The principle that, in a war of secrets, the most dangerous things are the ones you cannot see, the ones you have to listen for, the ones that only a person with extraordinary sensitivity can hear. Arthur sets down the tuning fork. He closes his tool case. He turns off the light in his workshop, and he listens, one more time, to the silence. The silence that is never really empty. The silence that contains ghosts. The silence that, in the right ear, in the ear of someone who has learned to listen more carefully than anyone should have to, speaks volumes. And that concludes our story. If you made it this far, please share your thoughts in the comments. Do not forget to subscribe for more incredible stories and check out the video on screen. I'm sure you'll enjoy it. See you next time. Word count, approximately 7,100 words. Runtime, approximately 42 to 45 minutes at standard narration pace.